Welcome, everyone. I'm Richard Herskowitz. I'm the Artistic and Executive Director of the Ashland Independent Film Festival. And we're here with the director of the film you just saw, The Bit Player. The director is Mark Levinson. Many of you may know Mark from his film Particle Fever, really an acclaimed feature documentary, also about science, the discovery of the Higgs boson, and as comes up in probably every single interview Mark does, he himself has a PhD in theoretical particle physics from Berkeley. And so we'll get to that and the fascinating intersections between art and science in your work, Mark. But first, I just want to ask you about how you yourself discovered Claude Shannon and realized that he would be a fascinating subject for a movie.
Yes, well, I have to confess and in common with probably many people out there, I did not know who Claude Shannon was until somebody, a friend, suggested him as a possible candidate for a new film, and it is shocking. In fact, I was in the distribution phase with Particle Fever, and I asked actually a number of physicist friends, and they didn't know actually for the most part. And it's sort of astonishing because he's really at the foundation of the information age, which we take for granted. And so I started to do a little bit of research, and this friend of mine had provided me some material, and it was so clear. I'm sorry. It was so clear that this person was egregiously overlooked. And so I thought, okay, that's certainly going to be worth looking at. But then what really convinced me was when I started to read and find out about him and his character, and this incredible playfulness, and that this man who had this childlike curiosity that on the one hand, revolutionized the world, but on the other hand, was interested in making a flaming trumpet. That was really appealing to me because I think, this idea of science being something that is an outgrowth of a natural curiosity of a child is something that was really important to me. And the idea that, you need to support this sort of broader introspection, curiosity and investigation that can lead to revolutionary things or to a toy.
Yeah, so Shannon himself was an artist and a scientist, and you are an artist and a scientist. Can you talk about that, the intersection between those two things in his life and your own?
Yes, well, as you alluded to, this is actually almost always one of the first questions is how do you go from theoretical physics into filmmaking? And, first of all, the physics I did was theoretical. It was actually, it was really the most abstract aspect of physics. And it really was something like an art. And I think that, people ask how you make that transition, and for me, it was not a fundamental change in the way I looked at things. It's not like I feel like, oh, there's one part of my brain that is, the scientist, one part is the artistic side. The fact is, there's a lot of commonality in it in terms of creativity and aesthetics, and it's all about curiosity and making sense of the world. And so in physics, we come up with theories. We come up with theories that are our best idea of how the universe works. And then you have to go out and you do experiments and you test it. But in film, for me, a film is also in some sense a theory about how the universe works. And you have to remember too, I went into fiction films. So I was actually, involved in fiction stories where, what was appealing to me was the idea that a filmmaker, a film is also in some sense a theory. It's a compression of distillation of something about how the world works. And it's simplified, but hopefully representing something bigger. And so I think, it was a decision to sort of broaden my palette from the physical universe to something that was more, human-based, but still looking for essential things about how do we make sense of the world around us.
Well, that brings up then another intersection of things that are often kept separated in your work, that is narrative and documentary. Particularly in this film, which is both dramatic and fiction and nonfiction blended, but just in also your own career, it's fascinating. Your first feature film was a narrative feature in the 90s, I think.
Right.
And you worked with, this fascinates me, with quite a while with Anthony Minghella, and then a couple of films with David Fincher. So just talk about this narrative feature background, what you learned from Minghella, who I heard was a brilliant teacher and amazing human being, from what I hear.
Yeah, I mean, I was really very lucky. I mean, I did make my first film, which was my own film, very low budget film, which was actually about former Russian dissident artists dealing with all the changes in the former Soviet Union, and it came out of my interest in science and in art and artists and how they survive, and again influenced by European films. And again, working in the fiction world, I knew I wanted to be working on. I thought I wanted to be doing more fictional films, working with actors, and so I sort of discovered the specialty of ADR, which is in post-production, working with actors in post-production to redo lines and change lines. And in Anthony, when I met Anthony on English Patient, first of all, as we were sussing each other out, the way you do in film, and you ask your favorite films, we both discovered that The Double Life of Veronique by Kieślowski was one of our favorite films. And so we said, okay, we've got something in common. And then I think Anthony, because he is his own screenwriter, he really saw how ADR could be the last chance for a rewrite. And so he really involved me in a very integral way in figuring out how you could shape things in the post-production. And, we could rewrite lines, and we could change things. And so it became both a personal and professional relationship that then went on to Towns of Mr. Ripley and Cold Mountain, and even some on Breaking and Entering. And I think, what it was a great example of, it was a great opportunity for me of collaboration to see. I mean, Anthony is just such a wonderful person and such a great writer. And it was an opportunity to really develop this skill of writing where, you would then actually go and work with the greatest actors in the world to do it. And, having Anthony's support for that was critical.
And you worked with some great actors on this one, Judith Ivey, John Hutton. I mean, can you talk about the casting and the directing, and then the blending of them with the archival material of these real people?
Yeah, so, it was, I mean, again, thinking I came from a narrative background. Particle Fever was almost sort of the extreme of a verite filmmaking, in the sense that, there were a lot of things happening where, you're just there and it's a once in a lifetime thing and you're hoping to come out of it alive with something useful. But I approached it, even that, from the perspective of a narrative filmmaker. And so, my idea always was that I wanted to focus on characters, I wanted to focus on story, and not make a traditional documentary. So on the bit player, again, once I started to see what was going on, unfortunately, I mean, I realized that Claude Shannon himself was dead. But the key was I found these transcripts of interviews that had been done in the 80s with him. And reading that, they were very literal, and they were done in his house. And, the interviewer was actually an engineer and was, interested in more technical questions, but Shannon was more interested in sort of showing him like his, juggling machines and things like that. So I really felt like that's what I really wanted to capture. I really wanted to capture that sense of it. But he was dead, and there's no footage, and there's very little footage. And so that, gave me this idea of, well, what if, if he was alive, I would have filmed him, and here's the audio for that. Could I sort of recreate something like this? And so that, was the origin of this idea of could I tell a story? Could I construct something? And so I used those interviews, and I had to write a script, but trying to draw on the things that he actually said to actually construct it. And so I wrote a script, and we did cast. We did it. I worked with a casting director here in New York, and it was interesting because we looked at some name actors for the role of Claude, and in the end, mostly it didn't work out. But John Hutton came in basically cold. My casting director knew him. He was primarily a theater director. He was at the Denver Rep. He was a stalwart of the Denver Rep. And he came in and he just sort of blew us away. And of course, there's an incredible physical resemblance as well. Yeah. And it just became clear he was Claude. And Judith Ivey was also somebody that the casting director knew. And so, I really have to acknowledge, the casting director, Paul Fouquet, actually, who came up with these people. And, it's interesting because John himself is not a scientist, and he was worried, and sometimes he would tell me on the set, he says, "Mark, I'm in the woods here. I'm in the woods." And I said, "You sound great. You sound great." And, the really terrific thing has been the reaction of people that knew Claude. And one, at an early stage, I just sent him a clip, and he wrote back and he said, "Where'd you get all this lost footage of Shannon?" And I did a screening up in Boston at MIT, and there was an architect there who had helped Shannon reconfigure his house. And he said that, John just so captured the way Shannon was, and his son and daughter felt that as well. So it was very.
And his capturing of that, was that from looking at, that involved looking at archival footage himself, or talking to you? Did he get it just from the script? How did you develop the performance?
I think it was mostly from the script, according to him. There wasn't a lot of archival footage. So, and the audio, actually, we found audio that went with the written transcripts, but it was really, really in bad condition. So the main thing that I think we got from that is that John had a chance to hear how Shannon laughed. And there was that, that sort of chuckle. We decided not to try to do an exact replication of his voice, because it just didn't seem worth it. So there, it's not like we tried to imitate him, but we did definitely try to capture the sense of it. And, there was one, again, poorly recorded video of him. He did something for a Canadian broadcasting company, and you could see the way he used his hand. That was something we couldn't get from just the transcripts. And so that was very helpful to see, how does a person actually present themselves? And he actually uses his hands, was interesting. And so John did take that, and Peggy really confirmed that was really exactly the way her father really did act. So it was, I think a lot from the script, with a couple of crucial little things he could get from video.
Do you think you might continue to work in this vein of docudrama or documentary and drama, or it really depends? I understand you're working on an adaptation of Goldberg Variations, the book. Is that still in the works?
Very much, yes. Do you know that book, or?
I know of it, but I haven't read it, but I know.
Yeah. So the Goldberg Variations. So this has been a passion project for me. It's this book by Richard Powers, who has now got a lot of attention. His last book, won the Pulitzer for Overstory, and for me, it's the sort of the dream story of really the overlap between art and science, because it's about a character who's a molecular biologist, who's a scientist, who discovers music and makes a decision to sort of pursue that. And there's interesting overlaps because, of course, the title, the Goldberg Variations, is a pun. It's a play on Bach, the Goldberg Variations, but also the Goldbug, the short story by Edgar Allan Poe, which turned out to be Shannon's favorite book. And so it's so interesting. And in fact, Powers mentions Shannon in the Goldberg Variations. And so there's this very interesting intersection, and both have to do with cryptography and coding. So anyways, that is the thing I'm really interested in. And I think it will be, it's envisioned as a narrative fiction piece, but I think that, the idea of using animation and graphics is something that I could imagine bringing into this. And for me, it's all about good storytelling. And so I actually really did enjoy this hybrid because there's things I like about documentary. I mean, I like the realness. I like, it's the truism that, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction, and you meet interesting people and it pulls you in different directions. I like that part of it, but I also do really like what you can construct and the contribution of an actor in particular and everything else. I like to be able to use all the tools at your disposal as a filmmaker. So I do, as you mentioned, I do really want to do the Goldberg Variations, but I'm open to, hybrids or whatever the particular project requires.
Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I hope we can bring you physically to Ashland with your next film.
Well, thanks, Richard, for showcasing the film and giving us this opportunity to reach a lot of people.
Thank you again.
Thank you.